The night had that fragile kind of warmth, manufactured, strained, as if everyone in the room were trying to keep a fragile piece balanced on the rim of a wine glass. My name is Stevie Morgan, I'm 28, and last month I learned that sometimes family secrets don't just tear people apart, they save lives. It began on a humid Charleston evening, in a restaurant that smelled of garlic, lemon butter, and nostalgia. The kind of place my dad loved, the sort that reminded him of when Mom was still alive, when laughter came easier, when Jason and I were just kids fighting over breadsticks. That night was supposed to be about him. Dad's 65th birthday, a celebration of a man who had worked his whole life fixing things, tractors, washing machines, people's bad days, and who now sat quietly at the head of the table, thinner than he used to be, his skin pale beneath the yellow light. He smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. The medication, the fatigue, the heart condition, it had all been wearing him down for months. Across from him sat Jason, my brother, leaning back in his chair like he owned the world. He probably felt like he did. Jason had that effortless charm people fall for. People like our father, who saw in him everything he'd hoped his son would become. He had a real estate business, a lake house, a luxury SUV parked outside. The kind of man who could make arrogance look like confidence. And then there was Lydia, Jason's wife. All manicured perfection and silent observation. She was the sort of woman who made people self-conscious without saying a word. Too polished, too poised, too still. I never knew what she thought of me. Maybe she didn't think of me at all. But that night, I watched her closely. Her smile was sharp, rehearsed, and just faintly cruel. The air buzzed with the clinking of cutlery and the faint sound of jazz from the speakers. Dad coughed twice into his napkin, and I reached for the water pitcher before Lydia did. She was faster. She leaned across, her perfume heavy, her hand gentle as she placed the glass in front of him. "You should drink more, George," she said sweetly. "Hydration helps the heart." I tried to smile, but something about her tone, it wasn't concern, it was control. When dessert came, tiramisu and laughter, Jason stood up, tapping his fork against his wineglass. The sound cut through the chatter. He grinned, raised his glass high, and said, "Say goodbye to this place, old man." The table laughed. Even Dad managed a chuckle, assuming Jason was teasing him about the old house again. "You finally gonna drag me out to your fancy suburb, huh?" he said, voice trembling with effort. But Jason didn't answer right away. His grin lingered a second too long, his eyes flicking toward Lydia, who gave a small, knowing smile. My heart stuttered. It wasn't the words, it was the tone. The undercurrent of something final in it. A private joke I wasn't in on. I tried to brush it off, but my stomach tightened, that subtle, instinctive pull of dread. Then I noticed the pill tray. It sat beside Dad's wineglass, the same one I packed for him every morning. Or so I thought. I'd made it a ritual, 6 pills, carefully separated, morning heart medication, afternoon diuretics, nighttime sleep aid. The system kept him stable. But this tray, the labels were slightly off. The times were written in a different hand. The pills weren't aligned in their usual pattern. "Where'd this come from?" I asked, too casually. Lydia glanced over, her expression open and innocent. "Oh, that? I brought it from the house. Thought I'd save you the trouble, sweetheart. You've been doing so much already." Her words were sugar, but her smile was ice. I nodded slowly. "Thanks," I said, forcing warmth into my voice. "That's thoughtful of you." Jason was already onto another joke, the room back to laughter and chatter, but the world around me had gone muffled. My mind was replaying every tiny detail, the way Lydia hovered when Dad took his medication, the faint smirk when Jason made his toast, the offhand way she'd said she'd brought it from the house. Dad was laughing faintly now, cheeks flushed from the wine, oblivious to the tension threading through me. Lydia leaned close, whispering something into his ear. He smiled, tired but content, and something about that, his frailty beside her composure, made my skin prickle. I told myself I was being paranoid, that maybe I was imagining patterns that weren't there, but the human body knows before the mind does. My body felt it, the wrongness, the air had changed. So when the waiter brought another round of dessert wine and everyone leaned back, basking in the comfort of sugar and nostalgia, I slipped my hand toward the tray, smoothly, casually. I slid it off the table and into my purse while pretending to reach for my napkin. Nobody noticed. Jason was telling a story about his latest deal. Lydia's laugh was a melody of false charm. Dad had closed his eyes for a moment, the exhaustion pulling him under. And me, I sat there, smiling faintly, pretending to listen while my heartbeat thundered in my ears. I didn't know what I'd find in that tray or why it terrified me so much. But my gut told me one thing with absolute clarity. Something was wrong, and I wasn't going to ignore it. That night, as candles flickered low and everyone hugged goodbye, I tucked my purse closer. Lydia's eyes caught mine for half a second. Her smile, still perfect, still unbroken, curved with something that felt like victory. And in that moment, I made a silent promise to myself. If she was playing a game, I was done sitting on the sidelines. The house smelled of cardboard and lemon-scented cleaner, a sharp stereo contrast to the small domestic clutter that had defined my childhood. Tools in the garage, a stack of National Geographics on the end table, my mother's faded recipe box. I pulled into the driveway and saw the U-Haul backed up to the garage, its door half open, blue moving blankets folded like indifferent flags. Jason's truck sat to one side, bed empty except for a couple of plastic crates. Lydia was at the front door when I walked up the path, hair tied back at last into something efficient, sleeves rolled, a clipboard in her hand. She smiled the exact smile she'd worn all evening, a glossy practice thing that looked good on paper and terrible in sunlight. "Stevie," she said, voice syrup smooth, "you must be tired. It's been a long week." I called, I said. My words were small and pitched to steady my nerves. Dad isn't answering. Lydia's eyebrows lifted with a performance of concern. We stopped by after breakfast. He seemed fine, resting. He wanted to go through some things. Inside, the living room was stripped for speed. Photographs that used to cluster on the mantel, Dad at the county fair, Mom at graduation, had been tucked into plastic sleeves and stacked in a banker's box already labeled keepsakes. The bookcase was half empty. A few favorite paperbacks lay on the carpet like cast-offs. There were piles. Donate, garage sale, to trash. On the kitchen counter, title papers lay spread, heavy with signatures and the bold official stamp of an escrow company. My breath shortened when I realized the documents were already filled out. Deed transfer, power of attorney forms, a withdrawal authorization. The signature on the bottom of each sheet bore Dad's name in a looping script that looked like his. Almost his, but the pen strokes had a hurried confidence that didn't belong to a man who had to set his coffee down before he could stand. Jason was moving through the house in a blur, carrying framed prints to the U-Haul, humming under his breath. He smiled when he saw me. It was a quick, businesslike smile, the kind given between partners closing a deal. "Hey Stevie, good timing. Help us box the china." Lydia and I are trying to make this quick so he doesn't get overwhelmed. "You've sold the house?" I asked. The question landed like a stone. He shrugged, light and practiced. "Yeah, we closed last week. Smooth process. We just wanted to help him get ready for the transition." I stepped closer to the kitchen table and reached for the stack of papers. "Jason, these are signed. When did Dad sign these?" He glanced at the forms and gave me a look that was almost pity. "You know how forgetful he's been. He's got good days and bad days. He must have signed them when he was lucid. We did this for him, less stress, fewer decisions for him to make." Dad sat in the recliner, a small figure swallowed by cushions. His cheeks had that sunken hollowness illness carves into people, his hands thin and freckled. He blinked slowly as if the world's edges had been feathered. "Stevie?" he said, voice a rough whisper. "Did you come by yesterday?" I thought. "He was here last night," Lydia said softly, moving to his side with an arm that claimed proximity like a talisman. She smoothed the blanket over his knees as if she'd been doing this for years. "We're just helping him downsize, George. You're going to feel better with less to worry about." George, my father, looked at her puzzled. "I don't remember signing anything, sweetheart," he said. The sweetheart slipped from his lips like a rehearsed line, an echo of the intimacy she was fabricating for him. And his confusion sat between us like a live coal. "You must have forgotten, George," Lydia cooed. And the word forgotten fell like a curtain call for a performance we hadn't been given a ticket to. I stayed still, watching the way Lydia's hand lingered on his wrist, feeling the calculated calm in that touch. It was tenderness, but it was also management, measured, applied, like a thermostat set to maintain a precise condition. Her smile did not falter when George's eyes clouded. She only leaned in closer, lowering her voice, rehearsing phrases, offering directions in the cadence of someone who had practiced soothing the disoriented. "Why didn't you tell me about the closing?" I asked, and the question wasn't just for facts, it was a probe searching for motive. Jason's jaw tightened imperceptibly. We thought it would be easier this way. He's happier on fewer decisions. He moved a box, changing the subject with the mechanical efficiency of a man who needed answers to be tidy and unchallenged. Boxes were being labeled in clear, ruthless handwriting. Electronics, cell, antiques, HOLD, furniture, DO8. A photograph of Mom slipped from a frame and landed face down on the hardwood. I picked it up. Mom's smile in that picture was wide and unaware, the sunlight catching her hair. I smelled old perfume and lemon cleaner and a metallic tang of adrenaline rising at the back of my throat. There were small things that didn't add up. A canceled check for an expensive purchase Lydia claimed Dad had authorized, a new credit card statement with higher than expected charges, a notarized form dated the previous week. Jason's for his own good sounded like a man trying to justify a transaction he'd grown impatient to finalize. Lydia's calm sounded like someone who had calculated timelines and cash flows, someone who thought the end could be arranged cleanly and profitably. My decision crystallized not as a drama but as an absolute utility. If they were taking advantage of him, if legal authority had been manufactured or his consent coerced, then this would not unravel on its own. Documents could be copied, signatures forged, testimonies staged. The law moved slow and cunning moved faster. I could call lawyers, I could call adult protective services, I could confront them and risk a polite battlefield that would look normal to everyone else. But my gut, that animal part of me that had kept watch since childhood, whispered a harsher truth. Waiting would be the same as surrender. I looked at my father, so small in the recliner, his breath shallow, his gaze trailing off into the mid-distance, and felt a hard, hot precision settle over me. There was no melodrama in the resolution. There was only one simple calculation: action now or loss later. Okay, I said finally, my voice flat, iron-tipped. I'm staying. Jason's smile faltered for a single instant. Lydia's fingers tightened on the clipboard. George blinked at me, puzzled and trusting, and I realized he still saw me as the little girl who fixed the radio with a screwdriver. He didn't yet see me as the kind of person who would step into the messy business of men who counted coin and measured people. I did not tell them what I suspected, not yet. I did not announce my plan. I only moved to the hallway, closing the distance between my father and the front door, between bargaining and whatever would come next. The house hummed with activity around us, boxes sliding, a radio murmuring a forgettable station. Outside, the U-Haul's engine idled like a beast waiting to be fed. In the small, precise silence that followed my declaration, the packing continued, but the rhythm had changed. The air felt charged with contest. The niceties had fallen away, replaced by the thin professional calculus of people who had already decided their losses and gains. I remembered Dad teaching me to spot defects in a machine. Listen for the hitch in the bearing, watch for the hairline crack. I had learned to trust those signs. Now, watching my brother make a tidy job of erasing a life of accumulations into numbered boxes, I understood the scale of what might be stolen. This was no longer a family transition. It had become a contest over consent and memory, and I had a single, undeniable obligation: to make sure George's voice, the one that had taught me to measure twice and cut once, would still belong to him when the dust settled. I had never thought of myself as the kind of person who could become invisible on demand, but that night I learned the geometry of small, careful deceit. I told Jason I'd be staying over to help pack, a casual pretense thick with the credibility of family obligation. He believed it because he'd always believed the easiest route was to assume I would cooperate. While he barked instructions at movers and Lydia organized jewelry into reinforced envelopes, I carried 3 tiny cameras in the lining of my tote like contraband. They were the sort of discreet, battery-powered units you could buy online under the guise of home security. No blinking lights, time-stamped footage, a motion sensor that saved clips and uploaded them to an encrypted folder on my laptop. I'd learned how to set them up the way my father had taught me to fix a carburetor, methodically, by feel, trusting practice over theory. The kitchen camera hugged the soffit above the sink, its lens tucked behind a sliver of decorative molding so it rayed as shadow. The hallway camera sat above the framed photos that tracked our family across decades, tacked to the back of an old picture frame with industrial double-sided tape and a tiny zip-tied mount that matched the wood grain. The living room camera was the nerve center, hidden behind a vent cover that I'd loosened and replaced with a precise hand. The grill hid the lens as neatly as a false wall hides a safe. Each camera angle overlapped the others by a few feet. I wanted redundancy, not chance. If someone waved a hand and obscured one view, another would catch the motion. The lens's focus where human hands would be: the kettle, the teapot, the recliner, the kitchen table where Lydia had placed the pill tray the night before. I ran a last cable into my backpack, a portable battery pack that would keep the units alive for nights, then slid the laptop flat into my bag. The software I used stitched the feeds into one timeline, a black bar where each camera's timecode marched across the screen. If I was going to expose something, it would be by pixels and timestamps. The law listened to footage even when ears did not. 2 nights later, I was in the spare room with the curtains drawn, my laptop on my knees, and a mug gone cold beside me. I told myself this was about proof, about facts. I told myself not to let anticipation become panic. I clicked open the encrypted folder, and the feeds loaded with the faint hiss of static and the hospital blue light of surveillance interfaces. The kitchen feed was the first to populate, the grain of light under the cabinet visible like a ribbon. Then the hallway. Then the living room where Dad's recliner looked like an island. I scrubbed forward, not wanting to miss the moment. The timestamp read 8:14 p.m. Lydia entered the kitchen with the slow efficiency of someone who had rehearsed their movements until they were indistinguishable from habit. She moved without fanfare, a cloth, a practiced tuck of hair behind her ear, the small brown vial I had seen in the medicine cabinet at the restaurant, the same shape, the same faint label she'd said was vitamin mix. She opened the vial, measured something with a tiny dropper, and leaned over the steaming teapot. The camera caught the tilt of her wrist, the glint of liquid, the way she watched the tea settle as if she were checking the level of oil in an engine, clinical, unhurried. The living room angle showed Dad's hand close to empty on the armrest, his fingers knotted by habit. He had his teacup on the side table, the cardboard coaster still under it from the cafe where he liked his weak brew. Lydia moved with the quiet intimacy one uses with people who are presumed to be dependent. She set the cup down in front of him, spoke softly. The mic on the device in the hallway picked up her whisper like a needle. "Just a few more days, old man." The words hung in the audio track, tiny and venomous. My stomach tightened so hard I thought I'd be sick. I rewound the clip twice, then 3 times, watching the same minute over until the edges blurred. The camera's timestamp gave me the precision the world outside my head lacked. August 12, 8:15 p.m. 8:16. The way Lydia's voice tapered into a soothed hum after the whisper was the most damning thing. It was practiced reassurance, a line delivered to convince not the ill man before her but witnesses who might later call it kindness. On the hallway feed, Jason appeared at the frame's edge long enough to lift a box, his back to the room, oblivious or complicit. The footage did not tell motive, only movement. My first reaction was a physical lurch, the animal recoil of a body betrayed. The second was practical. Evidence without context can be dismissed as mistake. So I did what I'd learned from people who dealt in forensics and truth. I secured the chain. I exported the segment, stamped the file with a checksum, uploaded one copy to an encrypted cloud drive and burned another to a flash drive that I hid inside a paperback in the guest room's bookshelf. I did not call Jason or Lydia. I did not confront my father. My hands trembled, but my mind made a list: preserve, verify, involve. The list was the only thing that steadied me. I called Officer Melissa Crane before dawn the next day, a line of communication carved from long-ago friendship and the brittle reality that I could not navigate this alone. Melissa answered on the second ring. She had been the campus cop back at the university, the one who had patted my shoulder after a night of adolescent flat tires and told me to keep receipts. Now she worked elder abuse investigations and spoke with a crispness tempered by compassion. When I sent her the encrypted link, she watched it on her precinct laptop while I sat in the car outside the hospital, the engine idling beneath me like a metronome. Her voice over the phone was low and precise. "Stay calm," she said, but I could hear the line and the words tighten. "Keep recording. Don't confront them. Preserve the footage. Make backups. If she's altering medication, we'll need timestamps, witness corroboration, and a clean chain for the files." She told me what to do like someone listing steps to disarm a bomb. Method first, emotion second. I anchored to the instructions because the alternative was raw anger and helplessness. That night, while the rest of the house slept in the careless way of people who believe themselves secure, I sat with a headset on, the laptop's glow painting my face in a pallid blue. I checked battery levels, logged motion alerts, tweaked audio sensitivity. The house sounds were magnified. The refrigerator's soft hum, the floorboard near the hallway that creaked when someone shifted their weight, the slow bell of the grandfather clock down the hall. Waiting was an education in restraint. Each tick was sharpening me rather than dulling fear. The cameras had given me a future tense, evidence that demanded action but did not yet resolve it. I was suddenly part guardian, part technician, part recorder of a life that could slip between signatures and smiles. I slept in stuttered bursts, dreams sung through with the clip I could not unsee. In the hours when the house held its breath, I sat and watched footage loop and relive until the scene became a tight jewel of truth in my hands. The night air felt heavy, almost viscous, as if the whole street held its breath for what was about to unfold. I had stationed myself in the corner of Dad's living room, laptop open, recording everything, yet no camera could capture the rising tension that twisted my stomach into tight knots. Through the hidden mic, I heard the faint screech of tires before Jason stormed through the front door, his leather shoes thumping against the hardwood with sharp, impatient cadence. His voice cut through the quiet like a blade. "You said the insurance would clear by now. Why isn't he in hospice yet?" The words were venom wrapped in frustration. I froze, my knuckles white on the laptop's edge. They weren't arguing about logistics, they were arguing about whether he would survive long enough to serve their financial plan. Lydia's response, tremulous and tight-lipped, confirmed it. "It's not my fault, he's still waking up after the doses." Cold reality struck me like a hammer. They weren't simply neglecting him or impatient. They were accelerating his decline deliberately. My chest tightened, my pulse spiked, and the rational part of my brain screamed that I had to act immediately. I didn't hesitate. I reached for my phone, thumb hovering over the emergency dial. Every second stretched like a drawn-out film reel of dread. 911, what's your emergency? The operator's voice was calm, professional, a lifeline cutting through the chaos inside my skull. "They, my brother, his wife, they've been poisoning my dad." I choked out, each word weighed with disbelief and fury. "Please, he's 65, congestive heart failure, and they've been giving him sedatives disguised as vitamins." The operator kept me on the line, her instructions precise. I stayed as composed as I could, moving subtly, keeping my hand near the camera controls, ensuring nothing went unrecorded. 10 minutes later, the wail of sirens echoed down the street. I watched as flashing red and blue lights painted the walls, the ceiling, the living room furniture in rapid pulses, like a strobe revealing the hidden truth. Jason realized the severity of the situation instantly. Through the mic, I heard him bark at Lydia. "Hide it. Get the vials, now." She fumbled, almost panicked, tipping the teapot in a clumsy attempt to destroy the evidence. Steam hissed and droplets fell, but the camera captured every detail, every tremor of guilt and fear on her face. They didn't know the footage was already backed up, encrypted, and time-stamped. It was unassailable. When the officers arrived, the tension fractured violently. They moved with practiced efficiency, sweeping the room, eyes narrowing on the pill tray I had pocketed days earlier, the small brown vial Lydia had used, and the neatly stacked house documents, all in her handwriting. Jason's face twisted from fury to disbelief as he realized there was no maneuvering around the evidence. "It's a misunderstanding," he kept repeating, his voice tight, rising in desperation. "My wife handles the paperwork. I don't." But his protests were hollow against the clarity of the material proof. Every angle captured the choreography of deceit. Lydia measuring, pouring, whispering, Jason overseeing, pressuring, and pretending to be oblivious. They had underestimated one thing: meticulous preparation, and someone unwilling to turn a blind eye. Dad, seated quietly in his recliner, looked smaller somehow, fragile under the fluorescent light of police flashlights. He barely raised his head, confusion mingling with relief as officers spoke gently to him, checking vitals and securing the scene. My hands were trembling, but I forced myself to keep typing notes, cataloging each object, each interaction. The investigation that followed uncovered the worst. Toxicology reports confirmed what my instincts had screamed from the first night of hidden cameras. The vitamins were a sedative potent enough to precipitate heart failure in elderly patients with compromised hearts. It was deliberate, calculated. Every pill, every sip of tea. An attempt to manipulate the timing of death for financial gain. And the house documents, they weren't just casual forms signed. They were legal instruments of control, a mechanism to ensure that wealth and property would shift according to their design, stripping Dad of autonomy under the guise of care. The handwriting, the altered labels, even the way Lydia smiled when Jason spoke, they were all tiny betrayals strung together into a chain strong enough to crush him. As I watched Dad sip water from a glass offered by a uniformed officer rather than my brother's hand, the weight of what had happened settled in my chest. It wasn't just a near tragedy. It was a collapse of trust, of familial loyalty, of the illusion I had held that blood alone protected us. My heart pounded not with relief, but with the jagged edges of betrayal sharpened to a point I would never forget. Even in the aftermath, I stayed vigilant. The footage, the vials, the documents, they were not just evidence. They were proof that sometimes survival required seeing what others wanted hidden, stepping beyond fear, and acting decisively. And in that collapse of lies and false smiles, a grim sense of justice quietly threaded through the room. Dad was alive, Jason and Lydia were detained, and the truth, raw, ugly, undeniable, had finally surfaced. The house, once a stage for celebration and smiles, had become a monument to deceit. And yet, in the midst of that ruin, I understood something irrevocable. Vigilance had saved a life that greed had sought to end. The hospital room smelled of antiseptic and faint traces of the evening meal. Dad lay in the bed, frail but alive, tubes trailing from his arms like delicate wires tethering him to life. Machines beeped steadily, a rhythm that had become familiar and comforting in the past week. I sat beside him, hand hovering over the blankets, afraid to intrude yet desperate to reassure him. His eyes opened slowly, bleary but sharp, and the first thing he did was search for mine. "Stevie." His voice trembled, weak but laced with confusion. How? How did you know?" I took a deep breath, fingers brushing the soft skin of his hand. There were no lectures, no heavy-handed explanations, only the simple truth, the kind that sometimes saves lives. I told him about the dinner, the way Jason's voice had carried that strange, unnatural weight as he raised his glass. I told him about the smirk on Lydia's face, so carefully hidden, so easily dismissed by everyone else. And I told him about the pill tray, how I'd noticed the labels were off, the spacing changed, and my gut screamed that something was wrong. "You just don't joke about goodbyes," I said softly, keeping my voice low so the monitors wouldn't pick up the tremor in my chest. It was the only explanation that could condense months of suspicion and weeks of preparation into a single line he could understand. I didn't need to embellish. The truth was heavy enough. His hand squeezed mine, fragile but insistent. Tears glimmered at the edges of his eyes. I thought you were just being careful," he whispered, but the words were lost in the torrent of relief washing over him. I nodded, too choked up to speak. Some moments don't need commentary, they need to be felt. The legal aftermath moved quickly. Jason was arrested on charges of financial fraud and attempted elder abuse. Watching him being led away in handcuffs, the same arrogance that had defined him for years now replaced by shock and fury, I felt no joy, only a grim sense of justice. Lydia, who had smiled so perfectly at that dinner, turned on him immediately, offering a full confession in exchange for a plea deal. The dynamic I had observed, the calculated smiles, the careful manipulation, crumbled under the weight of accountability. The house, once poised to shift ownership through deceit, was restored fully to Dad's name. Every falsified document, every altered signature, every paper that had once seemed like a weapon against him was voided. Walking through the old house again was surreal. The familiar scent of aged wood mingled with dust and sunlight. Cameras were still tucked in corners, discreet reminders of the vigilance that had kept Dad alive. I didn't remove them immediately, they had earned their place. This house, which had once been the setting of quiet celebrations and sudden betrayals, now felt like a sanctuary, a place where truth had finally found a foothold. I ran my fingers along the railing, over the banister worn smooth by decades of hands, and I felt something I hadn't expected, relief. Deep, quiet, almost sacred relief. Dad asked me one evening, his voice surprisingly steady now, still carrying the echoes of the week's ordeal. Why did you put those cameras in?" I looked at him, letting the truth settle in my own chest before I spoke. "Because you raised me to listen when something doesn't feel right," I said simply. I didn't add that I had doubted myself in those first days, that fear had gnawed at me, or that the thought of failure had haunted every click of the camera shutter. None of that mattered now. What mattered was that he understood. The lesson he had imparted years ago had guided me to act when it truly counted. He smiled then, the first real, unguarded smile in years. Not the father smiling at a child, but a father recognizing strength and resolve in someone grown, someone capable of taking the mantle of protection. His eyes glistened with gratitude, relief, and recognition. For the first time in decades, I felt seen not just as his daughter, but as the person who had shielded him from harm he hadn't known threatened him. The following days were quieter, filled with small acts of recovery, adjusting his medications under proper supervision, helping him settle back into routines that had once been disrupted by deception, and reclaiming the spaces in the house that had been tainted by manipulation. I recorded little details in my journal: the angle of light through the kitchen window, the way he laughed softly at a story from my childhood, the ease with which he now leaned on my guidance without fear or resentment. These moments, mundane to an outsider, were monumental victories over what had nearly been lost. And as I stood at the top of the stairs one evening, sunlight spilling across the polished floors, I realized something essential: protection isn't always loud, and courage isn't always visible. Sometimes it's the quiet choices, the decisions made in shadows and whispers, that preserve lives. I hadn't just saved my father. I had honored him, honored the lessons he had instilled, and in doing so, redefined the bond between us. For the first time in years, as he looked at me with those clear, unguarded eyes, I felt the full weight of it: the relief, the justice, and the enduring love that had never faltered, even when deceit had threatened to tear everything apart. It was a revelation, not just of who my father was, but of who I had become.